The sky above the Skelwood Forest was dark and heavy. Like an ancient whisper, a chill wind threaded through the canopy, lifting dry moss from stones covered in green lichen. And in the midst of that landscape, Victor, a veteran conservationist, walked quietly through the woods as if he were a part of it. For nearly 20 years, Victor had chosen to live apart from the human world, in a small wooden cabin by the stream, where the only sounds were waterfalls crashing against rock and wind howling through the towering pines. He hadn't abandoned the outside world because he hated it. He just no longer felt he belonged to it. That afternoon began like any other. Victor brought his notebook, binoculars, and folding knife, heading out to survey the northern part of the forest, where he'd set up motion-triggered cameras to monitor the movements of deer, wolves, and birds of prey. The wind carried the earthy, damp scent of the forest, a fragrance only those who'd lived long in the wild could recognize as a signal. The forest was preparing to change seasons. Suddenly, he froze. A sound, faint, not birdsong, not wind, not water. It sounded like crying. Victor tilted his head, listened. At first, he thought it was just the wind slipping through cracks in the rocks. But the second time, it was clearer. Something was whimpering. Choked in pain, his heart tightened. In the forest, an unfamiliar sound could mean a poacher, or a dying animal, though he'd seen countless tragic sights. Victor never got used to the sound of pain in nature. He picked up speed, his steps silent like a wildcat's, slipping past fallen logs and into dense undergrowth where no trail existed. And then he saw it. In the faint sunlight filtering through the leaves, a massive black bear lay curled on the ground, its front leg caught tightly in a steel trap. Blood had soaked the soil red. Its eyes were wet, not just with pain, but with fear. It growled softly when it saw him, but the growl was weak, trembling. Victor didn't move. He knew all too well, a wounded bear was the most dangerous thing. Pain became instinct, defense, but its gaze wasn't like any he had seen before. Not hostile, only pleading. He placed a hand on the knife handle, then let go. The forest fell quiet again. Only two living beings remained, staring at each other in a world where no one else could hear the call. One man who had withdrawn from society because he no longer believed in human kindness. One beast imprisoned in the very land it was born into. And both stood at the fragile border between life and death. Victor stood motionless, his hand hanging loosely by his side, just inches from the knife. But inside his mind, every survival instinct was screaming. The bear before him was at least twice his size, easily 400 kilograms. Even injured, a single swipe of its paw could shatter his bones. The fur along its shoulders stood on end. Its breath came fast, drenched in blood and tears. And the trap, that hideous piece of metal, had clenched down to the bone. Victor drew in a long breath. He could walk away, return to the ranger station, alert the rescue team, but that would take at least 3 hours to reach this point. And in those 3 hours, the bear would thrash itself to death, from blood loss, panic, or simply one wrong roll of its body. He knew that. Victor had seen bear corpses left in the forest before, legs mangled, entrails torn from their bodies after too much struggling. This bear, it wouldn't make it if he walked away. Don't do something stupid, Vic, a voice in his head growled. This isn't a deer, not a marten, it's a bear. One mistake and you're dead. Victor clenched his fists to stop them from trembling. You didn't come to the forest to watch and turn away, he told himself. He crouched lower, keeping his body below the bear's eye level, a non-threatening posture. Then, he began to speak, not in any bear language, not with magic, just with a human voice, low, steady, and resolute. I'm not here to hurt you. I won't let you die here. The bear let out a low hiss. Its body tense, its eyes widened, blood running down its cheek like dark tears. Victor stopped, waited. The wind passed through, stirring the canopy with a whisper like an ancient lullaby. One step, then another. He neared the trap, the distance now barely 2 meters. Victor slowly knelt, back rigid, hands raised so the bear could see the trap release tool resting in his palms. The bear didn't move, but something in its gaze had changed. Not full trust, not full fear, but there was a crack, a hairline fracture in the wall of despair, that Victor had to step through. Now, or never. Just listen to me, just a little longer. He whispered. Just, don't kill me while I'm trying to save you. He reached for the trap. Cold steel. The thick stench of blood. A sound rumbled from deep in the bear's throat, low. Guttural. Like the rasp of the forest's own spirit writhing in pain. Victor wrapped his fingers around the metal bar. And began. Steel screeched through the forest, its sharp sound slicing the air like it was cutting through flesh. Victor gritted his teeth, gripping the bear trap wrench tightly, the specialized tool he used for unsealing steel jaws. Each turn drew a defiant groan from the trap, like a mechanical serpent coldly refusing to open its mouth. The bear let out a roar, not the sound of battle, but something torn from deep within its organs. It locked eyes with him, its massive body jolting with such force that Victor instinctively staggered back half a step. His heart thundered in his chest. But he didn't run. You've come this far, Victor told himself. Either save it, or die with it. He knelt fully now, this time no longer wielding the tool, but instead extended a bare hand to gently touch the blood-slick foreleg of the bear. The bear's entire body went rigid. Its eyes darted wildly. A panic response could erupt in a single blink. But it didn't swipe. It didn't lunge. It just stared at him. Victor stared back, and in those eyes, for the second time since coming to this forest, he felt truly seen. Not by a human, but by nature. It was an ancient gaze, deep, black, wordless. There was no logic, no pretense, only the raw, unmasked presence of pain and life. At that moment, between man and bear, it wasn't rescuer and rescued. It was two beings balanced at the edge of mortality, neither wanting to fall alone. Victor gave a nod, a silent vow exchanged without need for language. He turned back to the trap, wedging deep into the metal core, his body taut as a drawn bowstring, hands bleeding from the sharp steel edges slicing his skin. Then, crack, the mechanism snapped. The trap sprang open. The bear rolled once, groaning in agony, one leg flailing, flinging soil into the air. Victor collapsed backward, hands raised instinctively to shield his head. But the blow never came. When he lifted his gaze, the bear was standing, on three legs, trembling, its fur soaked in blood, injured leg curled beneath it, limping away from the contraption that had caged its freedom for untold hours. It walked several paces, then turned its head. This time, its eyes no longer held pain, but silence, recognition, and no hatred, not gratitude, not forgiveness, but mutual acknowledgement. Victor remained sitting beside the broken trap. He didn't cheer. He didn't weep. He simply sat still, feeling that some part of himself had been seen for the very first time. By something not human. 3 days had passed since Victor rescued the bear. The steel trap had been buried deep beneath the forest soil, marked by a rotting wooden stake scrawled with uneven letters. It ends here. But nothing really ended. Victor returned to his routine, tracking the migration paths of deer, repairing camera traps, recording data on early winter signs and weather anomalies. He tried to force the memory of that gaze out of his mind. Because bears are wild, they leave, they don't return. That's how nature works. That's the order of the wild. But the forest began to fall silent in a strange, deliberate way. On the fourth afternoon, while Victor was adjusting the tie straps on a camera base, he heard something. A rustle in the leaves. Not wind, not birds flitting through branches. Something heavier, with intent. Victor turned. Nothing, but his instinct, honed through decades of wilderness, told him. Eyes were watching. The next morning, he found a set of fresh tracks near the ranger post. Deep, firm, recent. Bear tracks. No mistake. Victor's breath caught. It came back? Impossible. Bears don't do that. They don't seek humans out, unless they're injured or starving. He dismissed the thought. Coincidence? Maybe. But then, on the 5th day, while starting a fire on the forest's edge, Victor felt the wind shift. A scent slipped through the smoke. Dried blood. Fur. Bear. He turned. And across the tree line, buried in the gathering dusk, it stood. The bear. Not advancing. Not threatening. Not fleeing. Just present. Victor didn't move. No weapon in hand, no words spoken, but inside him, his heart beat like a war drum. The bear left after a few minutes. No footprints, only the unmistakable feeling that he was no longer alone. In the days that followed, it kept happening. A dark shape at the edge of vision. The snap of a branch behind him when he turned away. New paw prints every morning. A jar of honey mysteriously missing from the supply basket. Victor started recording it in his journal. Day 7. Not sure if it's imagination or something more. But it feels like it's near me. Not to hunt. Not to beg. Just to witness. On the crest of a rocky slope overlooking the Skelwood Forest valley. Victor sat quietly beside a small fire. The air was colder than most years, the leaves had turned a deep copper. And the calls of migrating birds echoed through the open sky. He had lived alone for too long. Long enough to understand that there are things you don't need to be told to feel. The shift in the wind. The hush of unseen footsteps. And the weight of eyes that never leave you. But today, Victor no longer felt fear. Because every time that dark shape appeared, it never crossed a certain invisible threshold, a distance far enough not to threaten, yet close enough to listen. For the first time in years, Victor found himself wanting to speak, not to a person, but to the creature standing between the trees like a silent spirit of the old forest. Today I reset the trail cams on the western ridge, he said, without turning around. Last night I saw signs of wolves. Might be a new pack. I'm not sure yet. Silence. Victor chuckled softly. I know you don't understand. But then again, I don't understand why you're still here either. A dry leaf dropped onto his shoulder. It's like you and I are living together, he murmured, without ever signing a lease. One morning, Victor left a piece of smoked fish and half a jar of honey in a basket outside his cabin. He didn't say anything. When he returned that evening, the basket was empty. But it hadn't been torn apart like most wild animals would do. The food had been taken deliberately. And stranger still, a small stone was placed inside the basket. Victor picked it up. Quartz. Rare. Not native to this stretch of forest. He laughed aloud. A payment, huh? Looks like you've got rules too. In the days that followed, a quiet ritual took shape. Victor began to talk, each night, facing the woods. He spoke of the animals he observed. The weather. His moods. Not expecting a reply, but knowing something out there was listening. The wind didn't bite as harshly anymore. Solitude didn't sting the way it used to. Because in a world where human voices had become too loud, there now existed a presence, silent, but never distant. One man who once turned away from society. And one creature, once wounded by the hand of man, now walking side by side, with no name needed for what they shared. Victor wrote in his journal. Day 14. I no longer feel alone in these woods. There is a shape that lingers, like a wordless companion. I've never touched it, but somehow, I know, it understands me better than anyone who ever lived beside me in the world I left behind. One morning, before the sun could pierce through the thick blanket of fog, Victor left his outpost earlier than usual. He carried with him binoculars, a hunting knife, a journal, and a small metal box full of bait. Not to catch, but to detect who else might be trying to. He had felt something off for days. The forest sparrows had stopped gathering near the stream. The deer were shifting their migration paths. And the animal tracks, many of them now veered sharply, as if fleeing from something. At a narrow trail to the southwestern ridge, a place few ventured, Victor found what he feared. A snare trap, expertly hidden between two rotting logs, laced with predator-attracting scent. This wasn't an accident. This was the work of professionals. Victor disarmed the trap with bare hands. No gloves. So he could feel the violence in every twisted wire. To remind himself, they're coming back. Not the animals. The ones who hunt them. That afternoon, he found 2 more steel traps. Spaced 300 meters apart. More disturbing, one of them had blood on its jaw. Fresh. Still wet. Victor clenched his fists. In his mind flashed the image of a bloodied paw. Long ago. No, he wouldn't let it happen again. That night, Victor built a fire larger than usual. He didn't look toward the forest. But his voice carried into the dark. You can hear me, can't you? New traps. West Bank. Stay away. Silence. Then, the snap of a dry twig behind him. Victor didn't turn. He simply nodded. The next morning, something strange happened. At the exact place Victor had disarmed a trap, he found a bear track, pressed directly over a stranger's bootprint. The bear had come, and it had followed the human scent. It knows. Victor whispered. It's watching, too. The poachers believed the forest was wild. But something wilder than wilderness now lived here. A creature that had learned the difference between the hand that freed it and the hand that once caged it. Victor returned to his outpost, hands stained with dirt and rust. In his journal, he wrote with urgent strokes. Day 21. For the first time, I don't think the bear is following me anymore. It's moving ahead, as if it's guarding something I haven't had the courage to name yet. A silent war has begun in the forest. The sky was cloudless, yet the air was thick, saturated with the acrid stench of burned wood and cold metal. Victor stood on a patch of bare earth, crouched over the third trap he'd found this week, this one baited. And worse, fresh blood smeared across the leaves, as if something had been caught just that morning. They're moving into the center of the forest now. No longer testing, they're hunting for real. Victor buried the trap, layered dried leaves over it, but didn't disarm it. He wanted someone to come back for it, and he would be waiting. That afternoon, Victor didn't return to his outpost. He hid behind a rock outcrop, 20 meters from the trap. The wind blew from the south, carrying no human scent toward the path. In his hands, binoculars. In his chest, a silence not of nature, but of a hunt where the roles were starting to reverse. 2 hours later, footsteps, not animal. 3 figures emerged from the edge of the trees. One tall man in a baseball cap, a rifle slung across his shoulder. A shorter man walking in front, clearing branches with a stick. A third, wearing a heavy backpack that clinked faintly with the sound of metal. Victor held his breath. It's them. They stopped exactly where Victor had reburied the trap. The third man began digging it up. Then, the group started murmuring, voices low. But Victor could guess from their gestures. They planned to expand the trap line north, where the bear usually roamed. Victor's heartbeat quickened. He began to edge backward, ready to retreat and call for enforcement. But the wind shifted. Just a breeze, enough to carry his human scent across the clearing. The tall one with the rifle froze, turned his head, stared straight toward Victor's hiding spot. Damn it, Victor hissed, and began to pull back. Then, a rustle behind him. Not human, not predator, but bear. It stepped from the shadows into the open, between Victor and the poachers. A towering silhouette, not just an animal, but a force of presence. The rifleman raised his weapon. Don't, Victor burst out instinctively, stood up, arms wide, placing himself between the bear and the men. All rules were now irrelevant. No one moved. The bear lowered its head slightly, eyes locked on the intruders. It didn't growl. It didn't need to. Some things in the forest speak without sound. Back off. The man with the backpack stammered, hands trembling. Is that yours? Victor didn't break eye contact with the bear. No, it belongs to the forest. The wind picked up. Branches trembled. The bear took one deliberate step forward, enough to make all 3 men stumble backward. The tall one chambered around, but he didn't fire. You don't shoot at eyes like that. Not unless you're prepared to face what comes next. Then, a roar. Low, measured, not a threat, a final warning. Seconds later, the poachers broke and fled, crashing through underbrush, leaving behind the trap and the pack. Only Victor remained, and the bear. The wind fell still. Victor exhaled, slowly lowering his arms. The bear turned, disappeared silently into the tree line. No one chased, no one spoke, but Victor knew. I was just saved, not by a rifle, not by luck, but by a creature once rescued, who had now made its choice to stand with the one who once stood for it. 3 days after the encounter with the poachers, the forest seemed to return to its calm. But Victor knew better. That afternoon, the sky changed without warning. No thunder, no rain, only a thin column of smoke, rising silently from the southwestern ridge of the Skelwood Forest. At first, it looked like morning mist. By dawn the next day, it had become a tower of flame, taller than the ancient pines. Victor ran, through brush, over roots, like he was part of the forest itself. In his pack, a first aid kit, a water canister, a map, and in his head, only one name repeated like a drumbeat. The bear. The fire had spread. Wind fed it. Smoke choked the air. Leaves turned ashen before they even fell. Victor passed 2 of his trap cam points, yelling through the burning haze. Where are you? Answer me. No roar. No tracks. Only the sound of collapse, branches snapping, soil splitting, embers raining like black snow. And then, he saw it. Through the gray curtain of smoke, a dark figure. Staggering. Its back arched low. Front paw. The one that had once been caught in steel, bleeding again. The bear was headed the wrong way, straight into the heart of the fire. Victor didn't think. He charged forward, waving his arms, voice breaking. Stop, look at me. The bear paused, its eyes red, not from rage, but from smoke and panic. It didn't recognize the world anymore. It needed a voice it remembered. Victor soaked a cloth, wrapped it around his face, and stepped into the firelight. Not this time, he whispered. I'm not leaving you behind. He moved backward, step by step, leading the way out. His arms gestured, voice low, just like he had done that first time with the trap. The bear hesitated, but then, one step. Another. A third. The way out was brutal. Winds turned flames into dragons. Ash fell like acid rain. Each of Victor's steps left a trail of blood and scorched breath. He turned. The bear was still behind him, but wheezing, limping. It would never make it out alone. Victor stopped, raised a hand. Flat ground here. I'll wait. He smashed a burning branch aside, clearing the path. The bear locked eyes with him, waiting, almost like asking, now? Victor nodded. Go, now. And it ran. Not fast, not strong, but alive. They tumbled down a rocky slope, into a shallow basin lake. Smoke chased them, like a ghost, but couldn't catch them. Night fell. Victor lay flat on the cold earth. Beside him, the bear, breathing hard, but alive. No words were spoken, none were needed. Through fire, they had chosen each other again. By sunrise, the fire crews reached the outer perimeter. Victor didn't say much. He gave only 3 words. Voice hoarse. One survived, and I wasn't the first one. It saved. The forest fire was extinguished after 3 days. Skelwood Forest turned ashen, as if it had passed through a different era. Darker, quieter, but life endured. Tiny green shoots began rising from the charred soil. Birdsong returned, and at the forest's edge, Victor built a small shelter. Not for himself, but for the bear. It stayed after the fire. Strangely, it didn't vanish like before. Didn't disappear into the silence. It stayed nearby, ate the fish Victor left out, drank from the stream, and at night, its amber eyes still glowed between the trees, like twin embers keeping watch. Victor never approached, never tried to touch it. He never gave it a name, because deep down, he understood. True friendship doesn't ask for ownership. One morning, the mist was thick as wool. Victor woke early. The shelter was empty. No paw prints. No sign. He walked the trails where it often slept. Nothing. Not until noon did he see it. Far away, on the northern ridge, climbing, step by steady step. It didn't look back, didn't roar, just walked on. Victor stood still. In his hand, a frayed cloth he'd once wrapped around its burned leg. The wind passed, carrying the scent of soil. And something else. Something he didn't yet know how to name. A kind of loss, born not from sorrow, but from gratitude. That day, he wrote in his journal. Day 43, post-fire. It left. No goodbye. And I didn't need a hug. Or one last look. Because everything worth saying was already spoken in silence. It was never mine. But for one chapter of life, we belonged to each other. The following week, Victor returned to the station. Mapped new trails. Dismantled damaged equipment. Took photos for his report. But at night, when he sat at his wooden desk, looking out the window into the dark, he always left a small piece of fish on the sill. Not waiting, just remembering. No more shadow between the trees. Only the wind, occasionally stirring the memory of a nameless bear, and the day they chose each other. In the fire. Winter came early that year. Snow blanketed the roof of the ranger station, clung thick to the old wooden steps leading to the small house where Victor had lived for 20 years. But this time, he wasn't alone, not because the bear had returned, but because their story, his and the bear's, had begun to drift beyond the forest. A modest article was published in a local ecological journal, recounting the forest fire and how Victor had rescued a wounded black bear. The author wasn't Victor. It was a young bioengineer, someone who'd met him by chance at an autumn conference. "I didn't know who you were at first," she said, "until you showed me a hand-drawn map of the forest, and the note scribbled in the corner. Caution here, the bear tends to return." After that article, others came. A group of students asked to intern in wildlife conservation. A documentary filmmaker requested to film his interview. Specialists in human-wildlife relationships, from Switzerland, Japan, even Australia, began to reach out. Victor declined. At first, he disliked cameras, disliked the noise of people disturbing the forest's sacred stillness. But one afternoon, sitting in the wooden kitchen, staring at a plate of smoked fish gone cold, Victor realized, if I don't tell the story, who will? If I stay silent forever, who will believe a bear once looked a man in the eye? And didn't claw, didn't bite, but chose to trust? So, he began to write, not a memoir, but something simpler. Skelwood Forest Memoranda. No tales of heroism, no dramatics. Just, the day the bear turned to face him for the first time. The day he disarmed a trap with his bare hands. The day they both stood inside a wall of smoke, and didn't run. The story was read in high schools, printed as pocket editions for conservation students, and eventually included in textbooks, along with one quote that became quietly iconic. Sometimes, the most dangerous thing in a forest isn't tooth or claw, but human impatience when we refuse to listen. Victor Hale. From Skelwood Forest Memoranda. An international foundation proposed establishing a protected zone. Sentinel's Rest. A tribute to an unnamed creature. One who had changed the path of a man, and the minds of a generation. Victor nodded. But he asked for just one thing. No iron gates. No surveillance cameras. Just leave one space, wide enough, for a bear to come back, if it chooses to. That night, the wind changed direction. Instead of sweeping down from the mountains as usual, it reversed, blowing out from the deep forest toward the old station. It carried the scent of something ancient, so achingly familiar that Victor jolted awake before dawn. He rose from the chair by the hearth, pulled on his coat, took a small flashlight and an old wool scarf, the same one he'd once used to bandage the bear's leg during the wildfire years ago. Victor didn't know where he was going. He just let his feet find the way. He crossed the narrow northern stream, now frozen like glass in the winter stillness. He walked the old trail, past the charred pine stumps, reminders of fire and survival. And when he reached the foot of the hill, he stopped. Under the moon, thin as parchment, a dark silhouette stood in the dewy clearing. Large, silent, steady, like a piece of the earth itself. The bear. There was no doubt. That stance, he had memorized it years ago. That shadow, he had watched it slip between 100 trees. But this time, it did not hide. Victor said nothing. He stepped forward, slowly, carrying nothing but a quiet welcome. The wind calmed. The trees stood still. Even the moon seemed to lower its gaze. They faced each other, 10 paces apart. Victor could see it clearly now, silver threads in the bear's fur. The slowed movements, the legs less steady than before. But the eyes, still the same. The same gaze that met his when blood stained the earth. When the trap was sprung. When they ran together through fire. He placed a hand over his chest, not in greeting. Not in request. Just, a small gesture. An acknowledgement of something sacred that once was. The bear nodded. It didn't growl. It breathed, a deep, slow exhale that rolled through the trees like the final sigh of a beautiful dream. Then it turned. Not running, not disappearing. Just walking back into the dark, as if, finally, it could leave in peace. Victor stood there long after the moon dipped low and the sky turned ash-gray. He didn't turn around, because he knew, the last moment had come. And it was perfect. The next morning, in his journal, he wrote, Day 127. It came back, not to ask, not to stay, but to prove something. Not everything precious is lost. Some bonds need only one final look to last a lifetime. On the first spring morning after the fire, a dark green pickup truck rolled to a stop in front of the weathered wooden station deep in Skelwood Forest. A young woman stepped out. Her name was Lena, a final-year student in ecological conservation, who had once listened to Victor's story during an online seminar. She couldn't explain why she had been drawn in, perhaps because in his voice, There was no fear of wild animals, only a fear of losing them. The cabin door was open. Unlocked. Waiting. On the wooden table lay a worn leather-bound notebook. A faded scarf folded neatly atop it. Lena picked it up. Inside, the first line, written in brown ink now smudged. Read. If you're reading this, I'm likely no longer here. Below it, the story of the bear. Day by day, each silent glance, each unspoken moment, Victor hadn't embellished. He wrote as if recounting it to the forest itself. At the very end, the shortest entry. Just 12 words. Now it's your turn, but don't try to be me. Be you. Lena exhaled. Slowly. She looked around the station. Everything remained. Maps, an old radio, wildlife logs, empty seed pods, and a dragonfly wing pressed between the pages of a forgotten book. Outside, sunlight filtered through the upper canopy. The wind smelled of young pine and morning promise. In that quiet moment, Lena understood. She wasn't there to replace Victor. No one could replace someone who had loved the forest with calloused hands and quiet grief. But someone had to stay. She began to wipe down the table, checked the gear, repaired the wooden fence around the stream. That afternoon, she placed a piece of fish on the windowsill. Not to lure anything, just to keep a promise. Weeks later, while reviewing trail cam footage, Lena opened the memory card. Frame 1, thick morning fog. Frame 2, a lone deer passing by. Frame 3, a large black silhouette, standing at the edge of the frame. No face, no direction, just present. Lena smiled. She didn't need confirmation. Because the forest doesn't repeat its stories with words. It does so with presence. And in that way, the flame Victor once carried, silent, steady, never seeking proof, had been passed on. No one knew exactly when Victor left. But one thing was certain. He never left the forest. He simply became a part of it. Thank you for walking all the way to the end of this journey. You may never meet a bear in your life, but I hope one day you'll know how to pause, listen, and choose not to abandon what deserves protection.